Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super excited to talk about, how to use one-on-ones to make you a better manager and employee. So I'll kind of pass the mic and let Brennan and Jocelyn introduce themselves here.
Hi everyone, I'm Brennan, CEO, co-founder of Hypercontext, which means I get to do a little bit of everything. Most of the time, I probably spend talking about product, talking about marketing, and talking to customers. We're big believers of that here. So I think that the nice thing about all of that for everyone in attendance here is not only do I do all of these types of one-on-ones and have experience kind of training up our crew to do the same, probably talked to the most people in the world about this topic. So been able to see the differences between company size, between industry, between geographies. Excited to share that all back with you today.
And I'm Jocelyn Brown. I've been working in sort of SaaS software for the last 15 plus years or so, mostly in customer success, but also in sales and marketing, training, sat on an executive team, have done all of these meetings, have done certainly hundreds and thousands of one-on-ones myself. And oddly like talking about it as well, because while I don't remember who taught me anything about it or introduced me to it, I do think it's probably one of the most important investments of time that you can or that I've ever made. And there's so much value in actually doing it intentionally. So I'm keen to spend an hour talking to all of you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks both for introducing. I'm Hiba. I'll just be moderating here, but I also work on the marketing team at Hypercontext, and really excited to have been able to just learn directly from Brennan and Jocelyn. And so super excited for everyone to get this chance as well. So a little bit about what we're talking about today is we're going to kind of go through 4 types of one-on-ones that are typically in people's calendars, including one-on-ones with direct reports, with managers, skip-level meetings, and peer-to-peer. And how to kind of approach each one. And we'll also be sharing the most frequently asked questions so far using data from our actual app, Hypercontext, that you can, and when the best time to ask those questions is. So real quick, just kind of going through what gives us any authority to talk about this. So Hypercontext, we're a software that helps managers and their teams streamline objectives, meetings, and feedback into one workflow. We've had over 100,000 managers and their teams trust us to be able to run these meetings better at companies ranging from super small to massive companies like Netflix, Intercom, and Facebook. And we also, like Brennan and Jocelyn said, we live and breathe one-on-ones, from the content we produce to the interviews we have to the behaviors we encourage within our platform. And building a tool and software that's super focused on enabling managers and their teams gives us a bit more information, I would say, than the average person when it comes to these topics. And so I'll kind of just quickly share the results here. It looks like the majority of people are having one-on-ones with their manager, some with direct reports, some with skip levels, and some with peers. And that being said, we'll kind of just dive right into the 4 types of one-on-ones and how you should approach them. So I will pass it on to Brennan.
Awesome. Well, I think the main thing on this, sorry, I was taking a screenshot of that poll result. I was really excited. The main thing with all of this, I think all of these types of webinars that we do is we really want this to be a conversation, not just us monologuing the whole time to you, our audience, who are also kind of in the trenches with us. So as we go through each of these types, really appreciate you going in the chat and asking questions, dumping in thoughts, sharing if you agree or disagree. Hiba is going to make sure that we're addressing all the questions that we possibly can. We want to make it valuable for you. Easiest way for us to do that is for you guys to get involved. So that said, kind of 4 core types here of one-on-one meetings that we think are particularly valuable. We kind of anticipated that the top 2 there, one-on-ones with direct and managers, are going to be the most common types. So we're going to spend some time talking about those a little bit more than the other 2, but how to get the most out of those 2 meetings before we jump into the bottom 2, which is maybe for those not doing them, how to get the most out of them, how to unlock the power there, and why they can really help you both get your work done and be super productive at work, but probably also level up your career. So for each of these various buckets, we're going to go through who's involved, how often you should be having this meeting, some theories and frameworks, stuff you can try tomorrow. And there's some common threads across all of them, right? And I think that's what Jocelyn and I are going to try to pull out, beyond just the fact that they're one-on-one. What are some of the common pieces across all that you can kind of borrow and steal and apply to the other types of meetings? So I think with that out of the way, first one up is one-on-ones with your direct reports, or one-on-ones with your team. And by definition, obviously 80-something% of you are doing these ones. This is really your time with your employees. This is your time with your direct reports to talk about what they want to talk about. And I think a lot of people also define this as their time with you. And that's certainly kind of the view that I take. But this is a routine cadence that you have discussing growth, performance, communication, work-related topics. And it's dedicated time between you and your employee. So diving into this one specifically, why do them to begin with? It's something that, myself, I remember as a first-time manager, hearing a lot of times from some of the experienced managers, like, oh, you got to do one-on-ones. Why are you not, you're not doing them? What are you talking about? And then, eventually hearing like, oh, it's like the highest leverage time I have with my team. Like, how are you not getting the benefits out of it? And it took me a while to figure out, why are some of the best managers in the world saying one-on-ones are the highest leverage, the highest leverage thing they do as a manager is that one-on-one time. Like, why are they saying that? I don't feel that way. So I'll echo some of what they've shared with me, and in full candor here, Jocelyn was one of those people that I was initially talking to, showing that. So not only a place for you to build rapport and trust and share news or share feelings or share frustrations or motivations, but it's also a dedicated place that you can rely on. So it's definitely something you're going to want to make sure is on your calendar. If you haven't otherwise filled out that poll, let's just see where everyone's sitting. Jocelyn, any reason why, like you said, you don't know who taught you, but why did you stick with one-on-ones? What were some of the reasons?
For me, it's the leverage part of it is twofold. One, the person I'm talking to is probably in a lot of rooms that I'm not in. So if there's things that I'm trying to communicate, either alignment on strategy or things like that, or just even generally things that I think are important, they also become another way to make sure a whole bunch of other people learn that. So the consistency of message or otherwise, but even better than that, I learn more from other people there, especially as you get further away from, and in my case, it's always been customer facing. So it's the further away you get from sort of that direct customer interaction, or the less frequent you're in that, the kind of more, the less and less practical advice. I sort of would always say I have no practical knowledge anymore, because I'm operating. People communicate with you differently as you become a manager or a leader in an organization. Customers even treat you differently, right? Because they're generally trying to get something specific if they're talking to a leader that they may not be communicating to somebody they're working day to day in the field. So to me, they were a massive source of information to actually understand what was truly going on. So the leverage is both in my learning and my ability to communicate more broadly. So I would agree, it's huge leverage time.
Speaking of time, we got the poll results back, but we're kind of replicating a little bit of a poll that we've done in the past. So kind of prior to COVID / post-COVID, right? It looks like prior we were 49% weekly and 57% 30 minutes. Now we're looking like 52% weekly and 62% 30. I think this echoes a little bit of what we've seen across the board. In general, people are spending way more time in meetings than they had previously. It's way easier to call a meeting. It's obviously way easier to travel to a meeting with Zoom than it would be otherwise. But because of that, the amount of time we have in our day kind of shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. So we have to condense things more and more. So appreciate you guys putting that in. Here's where I think, how do you want to interpret this data, right? There's something that is to be said about what most people are doing, but what should most people be doing? And I think there's a couple things here on this point. The first is beyond you should be having one-on-ones with your team. I haven't saw, or maybe there was a couple that said never. There's a couple times I've talked to customers, they do one-on-ones with their team, but they haven't spoken to their boss in a year, which I think is absolutely crazy, but it does happen. So beyond the fact that you should, because that guy was actually looking to leave his job, beyond the fact that you should have it, I think what you want to commit to is what's a frequency that is predictably accurate, meaning you're not going to move it often. You're not going to need to cancel it. You're not going to need to rearrange it. And same with the time commitment. What's a time commitment people can rely on? And I think more so if you're the manager having this with your direct reports, you want to make sure you're providing that consistency for your team. Once that consistency is there and they trust that it's there, you'll start to be able to work on participation from them. But if they can't rely that 99.9% of the time you're going to be meeting with your manager Mondays at 9 every single week without fail, it's going to be hard for them to start batching some of the requests into that meeting. Jocelyn, what's your time commitment? What has your time commitments evolved, or did you settle on a cadence and just stick with it?
For my one-on-one with directs, it's it actually to some degree is by level and by area of focus. To some degree, it's mostly the vast majority half hour weekly. I used to travel a ton, so the half hour I couldn't commit to more than half an hour, and I was often doing them in airports or otherwise. But I really reliably wanted to keep them there. With some of my peer ones, they were actually longer. Because we were trying to tackle possibly bigger and thornier issues. So again, it sort of depended. Some of my senior leaders, they'd be longer than sort of more junior leaders. But to me, I mean, I agree with you. And I saw Robin in there. I feel for you. 16 directs is tough. I actually found Hypercontext when I had 14 directs, and it saved my life because it just to be able to show up the way you want to show up for people and be organized and have engaging and important things to talk about is very tough if your directs aren't participating in providing the agenda, and 16 is a lot. So it's whatever you can reliably commit to. So if you can do half an hour every week, then that's what it is. I had some portion of my directs team on every other week, and that's just the nature of the job they were doing and what we needed to do. So it varied, and it was personalized to some degree.
I think some of it's going to also relate to how much throughput you want in those meetings. I know I've talked to several people before I even get to some of the questions of how often and how long. And they say, oh, like the one-on-one time with my boss is like the most important time I have with him or her. And it's like we just have such limited time. I have to really prepare for that to make sure I get the most out of it. Like, oh, like how much limited time do you have? You like 15 minutes every 2 weeks or something? And no, 30 minutes a week. But to the direct reports, that's a very limited window of opportunity to go through a whole slew of topics, especially once you get them elevated to the point where they are bringing the majority of the agenda items. So I think it's a mix, right? Of what's needed and also what you can commit to. And certainly at 16 direct reports, that might be pretty hard. But, the other thing is you do need that coaching time with some of them to think about elevating to team leads. So there are some frameworks and some advice that we can talk about here. I think the first, we'll get a little bit into psychological safety. So kind of two main sections on the how. One is what maybe should we talk about? And the next is just some frameworks for actually running the agenda to get through this. So I like to talk about this. I think it was really helpful for me, and we've iterated through this in a variety of different ways. But I think when you're thinking about your time in a one-on-one meeting, in order to make it very valuable for you and for your employee, you're going to want to think about these three characteristics. One is safety, the second is effort, and the third is benefit. And to go to John's question in the chat a little earlier, psychological safety, not physical safety, although let's just make sure everyone's physically safe before we do one-on-ones. But usually with Zoom meetings, most people are physically safe. Let's jump to psychological safety, which is a little bit different. It's a little bit harder to define. Google did a study internally on their team, actually two, One's called Project Oxygen, one's called Project Aristotle, if you want to do the background research. Countless other researchers echoing the same thing. Psychological safety is one of the highest leading indicators of team performance. So what is it and why is it that important? To describe it, there's kind of like a PhD definition, and I think there's kind of like a normal people analogy. So we all went through high school, and high school is a place that has low psychological safety. Most people in high school do not feel like they are immune from bullying. Most people feel like they're being judged. Most people feel like if they say the wrong thing, they could be ostracized or outcast or kicked out of their club or whatever. Whereas if you take a look at kindergartners, total opposite. There is nothing a kindergartner can do that is too weird for the other kindergartners, right? They'll go up to another kindergartner or someone at the playground and say, hey, do you want to like go and play with rocks? And someone's like, no, rocks are stupid. And they just turn around and go to the next kindergartner and ask the same question. And I think at work, it's much more common for us as adults to kind of default to high school, when in fact, the highest performing teams default to kindergarten. And it turns out the performance of kindergartners outperforms in a lot of tasks the performance of MBAs. You can replicate this in countless different times or countless different ways, and has been. But a good example, literally, where kindergartners can beat MBA students is just a couple different experiments where you get them to make pottery, or you get them to make like a spaghetti marshmallow tower. So spaghetti marshmallow tower, you have raw spaghetti sticks, you put them in marshmallows. Whoever can build this tallest tower wins. You get a whole bunch of kindergartners, you tell them to build the tallest tower, you get a whole bunch of MBA students, everyone has 20 minutes go, 10 minutes go. The kindergartners win every single time. The kindergartners win. It's not because they built them before, it's because they just start building. They stick the things in, they see it break, they look at what their other kindergartners are doing, they take the good ideas, they go, they share, how'd you do that, why, oh, that one toppled, and then let's rebuild it quickly. And they're quickly looking at each other. They have no idea what makes a sturdy tower. They're just going to try a whole bunch of things and steal from each other and copy from each other and brainstorm and share all those ideas around. They don't really care if their tower is the best. They're going to be proud if it is the best. MBA students are very cautious when dealing with each other. Who's going to lead the discussion? Do we want to brainstorm first? How do we want to set this all up? And they want to make sure, obviously, they don't want to lose against these kindergartners. So they debate some of the physics things, and they've got about 3 minutes left. And then someone just gets frustrated and jams some things together, and they have a pretty crappy tower. And I think what you want with your team is the ability for them to be not scared of each other, not scared of judgment, not scared of being judged for failure or for saying something stupid or for asking that stupid question. In fact, those stupid questions are the questions that need to be asked, because that's the information that's unknown, even the fact that you don't know that question. So I think in one-on-ones, you want to make sure that this is the single highest psychologically safe moment for your team. This is where they can bring anything they want to bring to you without fear. And if you don't have a high degree of psychological safety in those meetings, it's going to be hard to get anything else out. It will very much feel like a status report, right? Hey, boss, I did a lot of work. And you probably have a dashboard for that work anyway. So let's get on to the more strategic topics. Second thing is effort. You want to make sure that you as a manager are a very low effort person to talk to or share feedback to or share things to. This is a really hard thing for people. And I'll come back to this one as like a quick test to see if you're high effort or low effort. But basically, high effort people, it feels like the saying that people will say is like, they feel like they had to defend like their PhD dissertation in order to give their boss feedback, right? They'll ask for specifics, they'll ask for this, they'll ask for that, they'll ask for whatever, and it will grill them to death. And it'll be the point if you want to share something with your manager and you haven't done all of your homework, you haven't done 2 hours of prep for it, you might just not because you're too tired, and you might just start giving the easy answers, right? Do you feel happy in your role? Yep, super happy. And then that person quits 30 days later. So you want to make sure that you're very low effort to talk to, that you're not going to get grilled for any of the things that you bring, which usually tends to be the high effort people. I'll jump to benefit and I'll come back to that one. You want benefit to be very, very high. I'll give you the example that I used to hear all the time. I would work out of coffee shops, and inevitably during the day, two people at the coffee shop would be talking about work, and they would be complaining, oh, we should do this and we should do that, and why don't we do this, why don't we do that? And inevitably someone on the other side of the table will say, well, did you tell your manager about that? You tell management about it? These things seem so obvious that obviously, your company should do them. Did you bring that up to your boss? And they always say, what's the point? They don't listen anyways. And so they stop bringing things to management. They stop bringing things to the boss because they feel like it's falling on deaf ears. It's not being heard. You definitely don't want that to happen to you with your team. It's the hardest one, I think, to follow through on. So there's a couple quick tips for each of these, because you also don't need to agree that every single thing that comes to you needs to be actioned. You can disagree. And I think that's where the common trap for people in benefit is. So the one tip I'll give you on benefit is if anyone gives you feedback, if anyone gives you something where they expect action, commit to them something so that they know action will happen. But the commitment can be, and probably your default commitment should be, commit to thinking about this for a week, maybe collecting some additional data and coming back to you the following week or their next one-on-one with what we're going to do about it. And that gives you time to say, I don't believe we should do that thing you shared, and here's why, without having to react on the spot. And I think that's where most people fall. On effort, 2 quick tips maybe. Are you high effort or low effort? The easiest thing is to try to guess which one is going to be your downfall, benefit or effort. If you feel like benefit is your downfall, then you're a low effort person. If you feel like benefit is not going to be your downfall, you're probably high effort. That's probably just like a quick rule of thumb there. The easiest way to become lower effort is to be vulnerable first. Share feedback on how you're flawed or why you're flawed first, right? Open those doors. If you don't feel like you can kind of do some of those things, then it's going to be harder for other people to trust you. And again, I think a lot of these things is just listen, or sorry, the tip for effort is reflect. Anytime anyone ever shares anything with you, just reflect it back. So if they say, Brennan, you talk too much or rambling too much about safety, effort, and benefit, then you say, what I'm hearing from you, Hiba, is you're rambling too much about safety, benefit, and effort. In that case, that will allow them to say yes and, which is really helpful. The tip for safety is to be vulnerable first. I'm going to move on because I've given myself my own feedback. Couple of frameworks, structures to consider, and I'll bounce this off to Jocelyn afterwards. If you're thinking about your agenda, how do you actually structure some of this time? A couple things maybe to think about that a lot of managers use: 10-10-10 model, hands-off or guardrails. Personally, I look at when there's a new person you're onboarding, just try to stick with 10-10-10. But the goal is to get or at least my personal goals, to get them to hands off. This is their meeting. They should be the organizer, but they should drive the agenda. But until we get to that point, I usually follow 10-10-10, or at least I look at it. And I want to make sure at least 10 of the minutes that we've allocated is for topics that Dave brought up. I just make that explicit. I think something that a lot of managers trip up on is they'll, in their own head, follow 10-10 or try to or want to follow 10-10-10 or something like that, but they never tell their team. So one thing you can do in your next one-on-one immediately is just say, hey, this one-on-one is your meeting. You're responsible for the agenda. I want you to bring at least 3 items to the agenda every single week. Is everyone cool with that? We're cool. All right, cool. So next week you're going to bring 3 items. Yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. And that tends to help. You'll tend to get more items on the agenda from your direct reports and meetings. I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to pass this to Jocelyn. Anything kind of stand out for you on that you agree with, disagree with?
Well, I was going to share that on that sort of establishing psychological safety or otherwise, like one of the reasons for one-on-one is feedback, which is probably the hardest thing as a manager to do, as a direct to hear and action on, but it is such a accelerating factor for high performance teams, is that ability to have a feedback culture. And there's a new study, Adam Grant, and I can't remember who the other researcher was, where they looked at there's been long time direction has been to ask for feedback, but they've actually shown that it's better to share feedback that you've gotten before. And that actually the retention of that effort and the kind of creation of that psychological safety is way higher if you start with, this is feedback I've had on the past and this is what I'm working on, rather than just blanket asking for feedback or repeatedly asking for feedback. It's really hard for a direct sometimes to be hit with that question out of the blue, right? Because it's a lot of effort to do it well and do it right, and it may be too intimidating. I used to always tell the story of how I got fired from managing the SMB segment, because I spent most of my career managing enterprise clients, and I was terrible at it because I used to terrify the SMB clients because I had all these expectations that did make no sense for them. And so like I had a tough time kind of modulating my behavior, my advice, my expectations, depending on kind of what size of business I was working on. And it just starts there. I am flawed. I've made mistakes in the past. I've learned from them. I moved on. And that just opens up the fact that you're human, that you can do it. And that's have a proven impact. And then you can ask for feedback, right? Because they know that you appreciate it, that you listen to it, that you hear it, that you've had it before. And you don't get that sort of defensiveness and that fear of doing it. So the thing you should do tomorrow is share a piece of feedback with your direct that you've had before. That's my do it tomorrow tip.
We'll jump. I added a bunch, but I think the one thing I'll add here, because I think it's ahead, but if you don't just jump to the next slide, we'll skip that. Well, actually, really quickly on that, this is like a real thing I do. The screenshot on the previous slide is part of our app. So we have machine learner AI that categorizes your notes and agendas into kind of a management framework and lets you know if you are not addressing certain things that you should be, or you're not asking questions about certain areas. And so in a lot of my one-on-ones, at like the end of a one-on-one, I just open up that chart and take a look at my own blind spots. And often as a founder, I am like 900% focused on work, and whatever is left is for everything else. So a good way to just make sure I'm being a good manager, a good boss, and good leader is to double check my gut and make sure I'm at least kind of rotating through some of those other topics. I just use our app for that. But okay, the tip you can try tomorrow is try our app. But the real tip you can try tomorrow is a lot of people really like that Venn diagram we show, and I think that helps a lot of managers. It's too wordy and philosophical for like 90% of the people on your team. So the kind of dumbed down version of some of that, that's like, the applied version of that theory, I think is the lettuce pact. I don't know, do we have an article on that, or we're writing an article on it? I shared this and someone else wrote an article on it. So a lettuce pact basically is like, we've all been in this scenario where we've had lettuce in our teeth, right? Or someone has had lettuce in their teeth, or spinach or whatever, and they go up in front of their team and they make a presentation or whatever they're doing. God forbid they're doing a keynote presentation. They have this thing in their teeth and it's not good. It's embarrassing. We're all sitting there thinking it's embarrassing, but we haven't shared it with them. We're just kind of cringing, and it's almost like worse. Like we don't want to interrupt them and say like, hey, there's, lettuce in your teeth or something. And that then just causes them to feel embarrassed for the rest of the presentation. We don't know what to do. So we just let it ride out, and people have lettuce in their teeth. And then afterwards they find out and they're really embarrassed, and it's unfortunate. We've all probably experienced that. And that's a really kind of awkward feeling that probably none of us want to go through again. And I think what's really interesting about that story is you can kind of share a story like that to your team, right? Whether it's a time that you've experienced that on the witness end, or you've been through that on the speaker's end. And everyone will agree with you. We don't want to do that, right? And so what you can do in that moment, after whatever you've had a little brief discussion there, is you can say, let's make a pact, like you and I right now. Let's just make a pact that if we have lettuce in our teeth, metaphorically speaking, if we have lettuce in our teeth, we're just going to share that with each other. We're going to get past the embarrassment piece. We're just going to jump in and share it. We can just say, hey, lettuce pact, here's the thing I want to say. But just know that in the workplace environment, the lettuce in the teeth is more of a metaphor for the little things that we do that require feedback, right? Especially in remote, we're not going to be having lettuce in our teeth all the time. It's more likely that we're going to be doing little things that require just quick moments of feedback, right? We might be cutting people off. We might be mansplaining. We might be being too curt in our written communications. We might be, whatever it happens to be, calling people who don't want to be called, whatever it is. Let's make a pact now. If you see something, as soon as you see it, let us pact, share it with me. I'll do the same, or we'll add it to each other's one-on-one agendas. And you can kind of like virtually shake on that, or really shake on that if you want. And that helps you very quickly jump to a moment of psychological safety, right? Because we've kind of created that let us pact, where we pretend, or we're going to try our best to be psychologically safe in that brief moment. The effort's really low because you can just say, hey, let us pact, feedback. And then benefit is the thing that we always have to work on. So one thing you can try tomorrow, add let us pact to the top of your agendas on all your one-on-ones or your team meeting. Just say, okay, here's a let us story. Do we all want to commit to this and make a pact, at least within the team, that if we see something, we're going to say something.
All right. I think we're going to move and look at the other direction. So pretty much everything that Brennan said will apply going the other direction. But I think people maybe underestimate the role that use the direct report can play in giving benefit to your manager in that meeting, as well as to yourself, right? So it's an exchange of value in that they've given you time. And this is your best opportunity to grow and manage up. And manage up isn't all about sort of, pumping yourself up or bragging. It really is, there's a gap of information that is important for your manager, and they don't read minds, and they're not in the room for a lot of these things. So you are actually giving them a real gift when you're actually bringing things to the table. And there's also an opportunity. They can't read your mind about where you want to go. They want to keep you. You're important to them. They don't have necessarily as much time in the day to think about it. So if you can help them focus on the things that are going to be really important for you, you are helping them retain you. And that's a gift, right? Because recruiting is expensive and hard, and no one wants to do it, right? So this is an opportunity for you to actually grow, but also manage up. I will say that this was a massive benefit to me. And again, this is how I kind of ran into Hypercontext, is this was a way for my leaders to give me a heads up on things they needed, on things that were in their way, on things that I didn't know. And there was nothing better than having them actually manage me. It's such a gift when you get to that place where you have people that are actually managing me. So here's a couple sort of more specific ways that you can make this time valuable. When we actually did a survey to ask people about what they were actually finding difficult in their one-on-ones, it was making sure that they were having meaningful and productive conversations and making sure that they're providing value to their managers. So if we're focusing on this time as being the place to do those things, here's a few ways you can actually do that. Here's the advice. Loving Venn diagrams today, so we're just going to put every piece of advice we have in a Venn diagram. But just because your manager set the one-on-one does not mean it's their meeting. I think we've said this before, but ideally you get to a state where the one-on-one truly is the direct reports meeting, and that is a real benefit to the manager. There are some times where there are things that they need to get through and talk to, but mostly this is them opening up time, space, presence, intention for you. And you actually can make that time the most valuable if you take control of it. So if you're setting the expectations about what you're trying to accomplish, you're actually making it easier for them to show up and be prepared because you've told them how to be prepared. You can drive the meeting, so you can actually make sure that the things that are most important to you, whether it's your career expectations, whether it's salary, there's lots of things you need to talk to your manager about that aren't easy, or whether it's just questions. You can batch them together so you're not interrupting them, but you're actually getting everything answered in one place. And then you can give and ask for feedback. And it's not always up to the manager to decide when that feedback happens. You can drive the agenda on that. So we're just going to go through some examples. This is a real one-on-one happening live today. So where Nicole's actually telling Hiba exactly what is coming out of this meeting, what she expects, and how she wants to talk about it. She's getting that point of setting the agenda. Hiba can go and prioritize things, move things around. She can choose what they do first, but at least she's got a real record of exactly what is on Nicole's mind, and they can make sure that they're getting to everything on there. That goes to driving the meeting. Putting some time. So this manager has made time in what might be a very busy schedule. They've specifically made time for you. That time is really important to them. So the more work or a thought or effort you put into it, the better, right? It's going to show how much you care. It's going to show how invested you are in your development and otherwise, and it's going to actually make it more valuable. And Hibet, I didn't go through the poll answers, but if you want to bring them back, we can do that after. So there we go. Yeah, we've got one-on-one's your preference. You own the agenda. Look at all these people, equal ownership agenda. I love it. Absolutely want to make sure that there's 2 people participating in the agenda, depending on who you are as a manager. For me, I loved it when somebody else owned it. I would have gone 100% the other way. And it's going to really drive that sort of psychological safety. So the last sort of piece in there is asking for feedback, but there's a way to ask for feedback, right? So a generic statement of where can I improve is going to be hard. So you want to actually reduce the effort for your manager to be able to give that value back to you. So spend some time thinking about it. A blanket statement feels like you're just throwing it out there and you haven't actually thought about it. When you go and ask for very specific advice or an area, that really narrows the field and allows them to give you very practical and proactive advice. It may also lead them to share some feedback on something else that they've observed, but make it easier for that starting point. Again, you may not have had a lot of time. So if you do the upfront work, you're going to get way more return on that. Document it. We're just not good at remembering things. I think the stat is a week later, you've forgotten 90% of what you learned in a meeting. So in a week, you're going to forget what that feedback was. Write it down, right? So that's one of the benefits of hypercontext, is actually having that documentation, that history, that ability to go back and review it. And then that also allows you to show that you listened to it, you acted on it, and you actually are giving them benefit back. So they carved out that time for you. You made it very worthwhile for both of you, and then you actually came back. And that is going to do a lot for the trust they have in you. They're going to now start looking for opportunities. If they know what you're interested in, they're in a bunch of rooms where people are asking for help, advice, cross collaboration between departments or otherwise, your name's going to come up first because you've already expressed that interest. You've shown that you will follow through on it. And that's you managing your time, your career, and your time with them. And that's a real sign of trust and respect that you've actually taken the time to do the work. What are you going to do tomorrow, Brennan?
With my boss?
Yeah.
So my one-on-ones, effectively, no, I do have one-on-ones with the board, but the board meeting, there's a lot of these apply to the board meeting all the way up, right? A lot of these tips. I mean, a huge topic for CEOs is how do you manage the board, and that's just like the next rung in the managing up ladder. I think all of those things are true, and just as you were going through, so many things were popping into my head, right? And the better you become, it's like a little bit more intention, a little bit more intentional time you spend with your manager can go a long way. But even that small tip, I thought it was a really great example. Not how can I improve, but how can I improve on thing, right? And our brain organizes knowledge by thing, not by categories of stuff of improve, right? Things improve. So if you bring up the thing you want to improve on, you kind of prime your manager's brain for, oh, here's a whole bunch of tips that I've learned about writing that can really help people. I can cross-reference it with what I've seen from you, and I can give you the actionable tips. You're going to get much better feedback. The other thing is you're going to get feedback that you can benefit and show the benefit for, and then you're going to earn that trust that you're improving after manager feedback. I think the main thing here that you can really try tomorrow is take over the agenda for your meeting with your boss as much as you can. Let your boss add items to it, but take over the ownership of it. Take over the ownership of the notes, the documentation of next steps, and the prioritization of the items on there, with input obviously from them, including anything your boss commits to. So any sort of thing they say, yeah, I'll do that, I'll talk to this person, I'll do whatever. If you can document that next step, you're going to elevate multiple, if you're not already doing this, you're going to elevate multiple rungs on the helpfulness scale for your manager. And the final tip is the next week, just hold them accountable to it. It's going to feel weird, I think. You said you were going to do this. Did you get this done? If you basically say it in that way without the finger pointing, it's not weird for the manager. Like, hey, last week you said you were going to do this. Did this happen? Yes or no? And if no, okay, cool. Let's just make sure we get it done this next week. What will happen is they will spend less time annoying you. They will trust you so much that you're on your stuff that they will deal with bigger, hairier problems and they'll trust you to lead and run your own org much more effectively. So I would say that's the one thing you can do that will seriously help your manager and gain a lot of trust.
Agreed.
Okay, so skip level. Name is probably what it sounds like. You're going to skip a manager and go directly down one rung on a theoretical org chart. Quick question: how many of you do them either as a leader or do them or have, I guess, participate in them with a more senior leader? Submit that in there. And just jumping to the next slide, why do them in the first place as people are filling that out? They're a great opportunity for leaders to empathize with the team, and they're a great opportunity for the team to empathize with the leaders. And this is 100 times more true, I would say, in remote environments where you might actually not see that leader except for once a quarter or except for maybe at the town hall, but you'll probably never have that one-on-one time. And for leaders, it becomes an amazing time to do a fact-finding mission. It's an amazing time for you to learn and understand more of the intricacies of the problems or process inefficiencies that exist within your org. So by no means, I said the first part about empathy, but by no means is a leader doing this to you just for their own, just to make you feel happy or for your own engagement. They are definitely doing this for their own purpose, but they're not trying to trip you up. They're not trying to catch you off guard. They're just trying to learn more. So why for each? For employees, why do it? What are you going to gain out of it? I think this is your opportunity to ask as many questions as you can, but things that you don't know, right? Or things that are maybe hard for your boss even to know. What are the goals, objectives, strategies, visions? What's the world going to look like in a bit? What are things that maybe your org is doing not productively? And be naturally curious, and I think a good conversation will come up. It's obviously also your opportunity to share problems and things as you see it. 100% leaders are listening in those moments. They're very, very high leverage times. For the senior leaders doing them, it's that shared space for you to get an awareness of career progression, professional goals, and feedback. And like I said, huge fact-finding missions for those leaders. And Hiba, if you want to jump to the next slide. Apparently, I'm all about stories and analogies. There's I don't know, is the thing out there. It's not really an analogy, kind of an analogy, called the iceberg of ignorance. Which exists basically at any team above the size of 10 or any company above the size of 10. And it's basically like an iceberg. The amount of problems that are known to the organization are mainly below the waterline. So executives only see or know about 4% of the problems. And really at the executive level, it's just categories of problems. Team managers, you'd think would know more, but they only see about 9%. Team leads, 74%, they're kind of the bridge between stuff. And usually the employees, the ones who are doing work every day, see it all, feel it all the time, right? So the problems affect all of them, whereas executives are a little bit insulated from it. And I think what we want to do with some of these skip levels is just lower the waterline a little bit and understand in a higher fidelity or higher bandwidth, like what these problems are. Now, don't get me wrong. I haven't met an executive that wants to know 100% of the problems. They just want to know the problems that they can solve. And so they're looking for info or data that can help them solve some problems. They're definitely not trying to trip you up or get you in trouble or anything like that. And for the most part, another thing I think that people find is like, are they trying to get you to gossip about your manager or anything like that? No, they're usually not doing that. What they want to know is just they've received feedback. They've committed to somebody, hey, I'm gonna go and get some data over the next week, and the next one-on-one, I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do. And in the meantime, they're gonna ask some questions that help them form an opinion on it. So you get to aid in the creation of some of those opinions.
I think some of the same rules apply around psychological safety. If there's benefit to the manager from you doing skip level meetings, you actually often are learning things that you can do to help the manager, and you share that benefit with them, they'll start understanding why it's there, and in fact encourage them to meet with your boss, right? So if you're showing sort of that sort of equitable exchange of fact finding and that there's benefit to it and you're open about it, it's highly valuable. And I think I was sharing with Hiba yesterday, occasionally you'll find out that something that you said in a meeting kind of in passing, or a question you asked, somebody's implemented as a policy and that was never your intent. So the number of times you trip over something that you were like, gosh, I did not want that to become 2 hours of somebody's day or week or whatever it is. It's just a great way to also see whether there's broken telephone going on, and if you've unintentionally given somebody a new task that actually is not being used, right? So sometimes you can get rid of work. That's actually probably one of the best things in the skip level, is if you can kind of remove an entire area of work that people kind of thought you wanted them to do. So there's opportunity to remove obstacles, remove work, and all those kinds of things. And the more transparent, the more you encourage it with your leader, the better.
Well, I saw some of the stats there that there's a huge group of people that don't do them. So I would say the one thing you can try tomorrow is if you have the ability to run a skip by yourself, I would bring that up to some of your managers and say, hey, you can blame us. Went to some webinar, Hypercontext people were like, you should try them out once a quarter or something like that. At least once a year or whatever. So I want to try to do one or try to do a couple who would be good candidates. But at least try that. And I think for your first one, make sure you work on especially if it's coming out of nowhere, make sure you work on psychological safety. Do all of the pre-work stuff that you wouldn't typically do in a meeting, right? So don't just put 30 minutes on some person's calendar that's going to freak them out. Make sure their manager knows about it in advance. Make sure they know about it in advance, and make sure you're pretty clear with the purpose of the skip level. Hey, I want to spend some time just to get to know you a little bit better and understand if there's problems in our org that you're facing that I can help solve in my day to day. Put them at ease a little bit and take that first meeting pretty gently. But that would be my first step for those who can do it.
Yeah, and I would encourage your boss to do it, right? So maybe lead with that. So you want to do it, but you actually have your boss do it first with somebody who reports to you and they show it's normal behavior. All right, the last section is on the peer-to-peer. And again, this frequency depending on how closely you work with that department, or otherwise you may have more or less frequent. But what an unbelievable leverage for a leadership team if there's connective tissue throughout the whole organization, especially within the middle management. It extends the pool of people you get advice from. It extends the communication channels. It allows for alignment, all sorts of great things. So I'm not sure everybody thinks about one-on-ones. You think about it in your manager, but there's a real opportunity in the peer-to-peer. And it also, like, how many people do you get feedback from? How many people do you actually get advice, or can you take your management problems to, or otherwise? If you start connecting with your peers, you have this whole new peer network of people that are going through the same thing, that can help you, that you can maybe resolve some of your people issues without having to go to your leader. So I don't know if everybody's answered that question, but just as we wait for the last few answers to go in there, this really is just about breaking down silos and open communication. It's probably hard now because everybody's got more meetings than they can handle. So maybe you want to be a bit choosy about this. And I certainly, when I was sitting on an executive leadership team, I had one with everybody on the executive team, but some of them were once a month and they were half an hour. With the engineering lead, for example, there wasn't a lot of reason for us to meet on a regular basis, but we were having some of the same issues. The other thing too is you can talk about how to manage your own manager. You're all dealing with the same person. You may be able to find ways that you guys can collectively do things. All right, so just quickly, these are going to help you align on company missions and goals. Look at that, there is a bunch of, where you're getting advice from. Peers outside of my department, excellent. That's exactly what we're looking for, is just a bigger pool of folks to get advice from. So you're going to align on company missions and goals. You cannot repeat goals and mission of the company enough, right? And the more you repeat them, the more people that are talking the same language, the better and faster your company's going to move. So like, this is just one other channel to make sure that everybody's there. And it's probably your fastest path of finding where the points of misalignment are. And certainly cross department is typically where they go, because they've got a different lens on how the world works. You can replace blame with curiosity. And so, my career was in customer success. So customer success and product can find themselves at odds because this is what the customers keep asking for. Why don't you build it? This is what we built. Why can't you get the customers to use it. That would have been sort of a typical thing. If you're connecting at a peer level and you're going there with curiosity, you can start to actually understand the reasons why on both sides. And you can start showing up at a way where you can start now collaborate and solve the problem. So if you're showing up to those peers of peers, you can reduce the amount of finger pointing. And your team, when they go to point their finger at something, you can actually now back your peer up. You can help them understand. You can give greater context to the decisions being made. And then everybody can actually show up. They're all supposed to be rowing in the same direction, but if they don't have the context for the why, someone else is not seeing it the same way they do, they might continue to entrench themselves in that sort of collection. And that's going to happen not at the executive level. That's going to happen much further and closer to the ground. And so that's why that's such a critical and important thing to help the company move fast. So do them. They're good. Do the ones that you can. Now we've asked you to potentially overcommit. So probably worth looking at what's the furthest away from you versus the closest, and do a frequency that's actually gonna help you.
I'd agree. I think these are types of meetings I think that show a lot of maturity and opportunities to take a ton of effort off of the typical management structure and kind of skip the queue and just go and deal with things directly. So instead of giving your manager feedback about a team member, instead of giving your manager feedback about a different department, your manager has to go and chase. If you can deliver that directly, you're increasing the throughput of your organization. And for the most part, that's what, everyone all the way up to execs care about. So the faster you can do that, I think, the better and the more mature the org becomes.
Yeah. So thank you both. We're going to kind of quickly just riff through or share just some of the top questions that have been asked, and then we'll open up to the Q&A. I know there's a ton of great questions, so maybe we'll just kind of share them, add a little bit of context, and then we'll dive right into Q&A. So maybe, Brennan, we can start with you. This is the 5th most asked question so far this year across all of the one-on-ones within our app. So yeah.
I think you want to add this in each of your one-on-ones, like at least at the end of every quarterly kickoff or something like that, and your skips, and just be really attentive to what some of the questions are. And I think the answers to those questions should probably be shared maybe in the team meeting, right? So if you've learned one person had this question, probably means there are others who have it that just don't know to ask or don't know how to ask. So you can kind of share that in the team. And I think, we're asking a lot of meetings out of you. And I think that the really important thing with some of these meetings is not just that they all have to exist and you have to find time for all of them, but they all work together to create a management cadence or a management rhythm that actually frees up a lot of time. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's a good one to ask at the start of every quarter.
Yeah, I mean, this is the opportunity to break down those silos and take some weight off of other people. So just asking how they can work better together and where things are broken. I used to also ask, like, what does your team think we do? And understanding somebody's actual impression of what their day-to-day job is tells you whether they actually understand or whether there's, again, maybe some blame or some overlap going on, because sometimes they'll try and do what's in your domain because they think it's not getting done, right? So like there's just an opportunity to, again, provide some context, open up some silos.
1 to 10, how happy are you at work? They're going to give you a score. Ignore the score. Have a conversation about what it would take to get them from, say, a 6 to a 7. I think that's the more interesting thing. You might want to log those scores over time, right, to see are they fluctuating up and down. But I think you really want to talk about how do we move you up just one level.
Yeah, everybody wants to know, how can I help? How can I help?
Similar on that one, like the more specificity, the easier life's can become in delivering that, right? Like they might come up with something like, shit, this is going to be really hard. How can I better support you when it comes to X? Might be helpful.
What's one thing I can take off your plate?
I love this one because that's like the easiest, for me, that's the easiest thing. Like I can just ban people from doing certain work. It's almost like there's goals and then there's almost like anti-goals, right? Like, we really want to focus on these 3 or 4 things this quarter. That's the number one most important thing. And then people are like, well, I'm bogged down in this. It's like, you can delay that 3 weeks. I give you permission. I'll take the blame. And I think that's a huge freeing moment for the team.
First question, if you're a new manager to the organization, are there any tips on how to use one-on-ones during your first 90 days? Conversely, if you're about to exit an organization as well, what should you use your last few one-on-ones with your direct reports before moving on to a new team?
Yeah, I mean, if you're new to an organization, that is all your opportunity to learn, right? So that's your opportunity to build that trust and that relationship because you're relying on them for that information. And there's not going to be a better time for you to ask any question, and really approach it with curiosity and a really open mind because you're not bogged down yet with the sort of traditions or the habits of that organization. So you should spend 90 days learning and talking to as many people. And that's a chance also for skip levels. I mean, you should be talking up and down the organization as much as you can. But that really is a chance, one, to operate with curiosity, to find out how people like to be communicated with and share with them how you like to be communicated with, because that helps you start the relationship off really solid. I'm not sure I've ever thought about the one-on-ones on an exit. I usually use them maybe to thank people, but there's probably opportunity there to continue a relationship.
I think first 90 days, there's a book called The First 90 Days.
Yep.
I would just scan that or Audible it on fast forward, and they'll give you probably thousands of questions to ask in those one-on-ones for 90 days. But I think a lot of it is getting up to speed. So there are specific ways to get up to speed faster, and I think that'll be super helpful. On the way out, I have a belief anyways that treat all relationships like long-term relationships, because at the start you don't know which ones will be. And certainly in tech, I would say, like more so than most, it's not uncommon for your direct report to start $1 billion business. It certainly happens. Steve Jobs was an intern at Hewlett Packard. I'm sure Hewlett Packard probably regretted letting him
Losing him.
Yeah. So I would use that moment to kind of cement that thought with everyone that you can, and get personal contact information so that, while maybe you're not going to be working at the same company, you can remain friends.
And for Katie, I mean, sharing that you're really happy where you are in your role and what you want to do and where you want to stay, that is valuable. Because as leaders, we're often looking at org design, trying to figure out what we're going to do. So understanding that somebody loves what they do and that's what they want to do, that really does help you kind of figure out where you're going to move all the pieces on the board, especially in a growth company. So really expressing what motivates you, what gives you energy. Those are things that are helpful as people are figuring out what to do. And it's not a negative to love your job and want to do it for a long term. But they don't read your mind. There's a bias built in that everybody thinks everybody wants to grow and go up. It's just not true.
Yeah, and just to add some context for everyone, because I don't know if people can see the Q&A, but the question was, what do I do as an employee in a one-on-one if I feel like I don't have anything to say regarding strategy or career growth? They're in an associate position with no direct reports, but they're just really happy where they are in their job. And so how do you have that conversation? I think that was a great, solid answer, Jocelyn. And then maybe just the final question here before we wrap up, but what's your advice for employees who are trying to improve psychological safety in one-on-ones with their manager?
So Jocelyn?
Brennan, I was just you think about this probably more than I do. I mean, psychological safety, it is possible that you may not be able to create psychological safety with a person. So first of all, we've given you lots of ideas about what are the ways in which you can approach that. And so, but don't beat yourself up. That might not be a mode that person operates on. And then that sort of maybe makes you ask, where can I get that psychological safety? Maybe it's not with your direct boss. Maybe there's a peer or somebody else in the organization that you can build that credibility. But if you've been vulnerable, if you've shown benefit, if you're a low effort person and you're still struggling with that, I think you want to continue to invest in people and into a relationship. But there might be, it's okay to know that there might be a limit in some relationships. But I think being as open and honest and continuing to work at it is always going to move along. And some people give it more freely than others.
Yeah, would agree with that. I think it's harder to do working up the org chart than it is going down the org chart for sure. I think the like step to like Jedi mind trick, maybe up the org chart a little bit, is start with the tactical stuff before you. It's almost like if you're working,
clear the decks.
Yeah, like if you're working down, you can start with like some of the theory and the thought and psychological safety, and then have whatever. I think you almost want to work backwards if you're going up. You want to start with benefit and effort, and then once you've worked through both of those, you can kind of get to psychological safety. So the first thing I would do is like just try to grab a hold of that meeting, just own it, right? Try to clear things off the plate for your boss and reduce stress levels a little bit as it relates to you. Tends to make them like you more and open up a little bit more. And then once they start opening up, just mirror that back to them. And so take the agenda, take the notes, take the next steps, hold each other accountable. They'll start to be in a little bit more of a relief state around you, just knowing that you're on top of your stuff. And then as you ask them for their thoughts and feelings about the company and the direction, reflect or mirror it back. So what I'm hearing is that you're feeling upset that the pace of the organization, and they're going to say yes and continue. That'll start getting some of the thoughts out, and then they'll get into a place where they're probably talking about feelings, being vulnerable, whatever, and you'll get there. But that will take usually that'll take some investment. Yeah, that'll take some time. A big thing for that too, I would say, is like peer level. Go to your peers first, and then just like share quick tips once a month or whatever. Like, is anybody like manage up better? Like, how can I how can we perform better as a team? Blah 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 blah. And, I'll share some notes.
Hi there, I'm Hiba from Hypercontext, and I hope you learned something out of that session. If you'd like to continue learning more about all things leadership, you can check out our latest video here, or you can subscribe to our channel below. You can also find us at hypercontext.com and join the conversation on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to chat. Thanks.